What if the most revolutionary financial technology of the 21st century was saved by the darkest money in modern history? In January, the U.S. Department of Justice released over 3 million pages of documents related to Jeffrey Epstein. 3 million pages, along with 180,000 images and 2,000 videos. Now, most of the media coverage since then has focused on politicians, royals, celebrities, and fair enough, there are huge stories in there. But there's a thread running through these documents that almost nobody in mainstream media is pulling on. A thread that doesn't lead to a palace or a political party. It leads to Bitcoin. And not in the way you might expect. Nobody is saying Epstein hacked Bitcoin or planted a backdoor in the code. That's not what the documents show. What they show is something arguably more unsettling. They show that at the exact moment Bitcoin was at its most fragile, when its entire development infrastructure was on the verge of collapse, Jeffrey Epstein's money quietly stepped in to hold it together. This is the first video in a 5-part series, and by the time we're done, you're going to see a pattern that changes how you think about the entire crypto industry. Let's start at the beginning. If you've spent any time in the crypto world, you know the story. Bitcoin was created by an anonymous figure, or group, using the name Satoshi Nakamoto. A white paper published in 2008. The first block mined in January 2009. No company behind it. No government. No institution. Just code and ideology. The whole point was to build a financial system that couldn't be controlled by the same people who had just crashed the global economy. No central bank. No middleman. No single point of failure. And for a while, that origin story held up. The early Bitcoin community really was a bunch of cypherpunks, libertarians, and cryptography nerds running nodes in their apartments. Satoshi disappeared in 2011. The project continued without any single leader. It felt like the real thing. But here's what most people don't realize about open source projects, even truly decentralized ones. The code might be open. Anyone can read it. Anyone can propose changes, but someone still has to maintain it. Someone has to review the pull requests, merge the updates, make judgment calls about which direction the protocol goes. And those people need to eat. They need salaries. They need institutional backing. The moment you ask, who pays the developers, the decentralization story gets a lot more complicated. And in 2014, that question became an emergency. The Bitcoin Foundation was the closest thing the ecosystem had to a central support structure. It wasn't a company, it was a nonprofit. And its main job was funding the small group of developers who maintained Bitcoin Core, the reference implementation of the software that every node on the network runs. We're talking about maybe 5 people whose decisions shaped the entire protocol. By 2015, the foundation was done. Bankrupt. Years of mismanagement, internal conflicts, and dwindling donations had gutted it. And suddenly, those 5 developers, the people responsible for keeping the most ambitious monetary experiment in modern history alive, had nowhere to go. No salaries, no office, no organizational umbrella. Now, if you're someone who thinks about power, not code, but power, this is the moment that matters. Because what you're looking at is a technology that has already attracted billions of dollars in investment, millions of ideologically committed users, and enormous media attention. And the tiny group of people who actually steer its technical direction is suddenly up for grabs. Whoever fills that vacuum gets to shape Bitcoin during its most critical growth phase. Not by hacking the code, by employing the people who write it. Remember that, because that's exactly what happened. 10 days after the Bitcoin Foundation effectively collapsed, Joy Ito, the director of MIT's Media Lab, announced the creation of the Digital Currency Initiative, MIT, one of the most prestigious research institutions on the planet. The kind of name that gives instant legitimacy to anything it touches. And within weeks, 3 of Bitcoin's core developers, Vladimir van der Laan, Gavin Andresen, and Corey Fields, moved to MIT. Van der Laan was the lead maintainer. Andresen was considered the chief scientist. Fields was a key contributor. Together, these 3 had more influence over Bitcoin's technical future than perhaps anyone else alive. Now, Ito was fast. He later described how multiple organizations scrambled to take control of the developers after the foundation's collapse. In his own words, paraphrasing from the emails now in the DOJ files, he moved quickly to win this round. And he did. MIT got the developers. MIT got the legitimacy. MIT became the institutional home of Bitcoin development. But here's the question nobody was asking at the time. Where did MIT get the money to do this so fast? The answer, as we now know from the DOJ documents, involves a name that shouldn't be anywhere near the foundations of a supposedly anti-establishment technology. The documents released on January 30th contain email correspondence between Joy Ito and Jeffrey Epstein. In one key exchange, sent shortly after the developers were secured, Ito referenced the Digital Currency Initiative and told Epstein, and again, I'm paraphrasing based on reporting from Bloomberg, DL News, Crypto Valley Journal, and others who've reviewed the actual files, that he had used gift funds to underwrite the initiative, which allowed them to move quickly, and he thanked Epstein. Epstein replied briefly. He referenced one of the developers by first name. He was clearly paying attention to who these people were. Now let's talk numbers. Between 2002 and 2017, Epstein donated a total of roughly $850,000 to MIT. Of that, about $525,000 went specifically to the Digital Currency Initiative at the Media Lab, $525,000. In the context of Epstein's wealth, that's a rounding error. But in the context of Bitcoin developer salaries at a moment when nobody else was paying them, that's everything. And there's an important nuance here. The developers, van der Laan, Andreessen, Fields, reportedly had no knowledge of where the money came from. MIT has institutional channels. Donations go through the university. The developers got paychecks from MIT, not from some guy's offshore account. To them, it was legitimate academic employment. But Joy Ito knew. The email trail makes that clear. He was in direct communication with Epstein about this specific initiative. He knew the money's origin, and he actively worked to keep that information hidden. This came out in 2019, when the New Yorker published an investigation showing Ito had systematically concealed Epstein's donations, not just to the Digital Currency Initiative, but to the Media Lab broadly. He even listed Epstein as anonymous in internal records to avoid scrutiny. Ito resigned immediately after the story broke. But here's what makes the timing devastating. Epstein had been convicted of soliciting a minor in 2008. He served time. He was a registered sex offender. This was all public record by 2014 and 2015, when these donations were flowing into the initiative that would house Bitcoin's core developers. Ito didn't take money from someone whose crimes were later discovered. He took money from someone whose crimes were already known, and he hid it. So let me frame what we've established so far, because I want to be precise about what the documents show and what they don't. The documents do not show that Epstein controlled Bitcoin's code. They don't show that the developers were compromised. They don't show a backdoor or a conspiracy to rewrite the protocol. What they show is this. At the exact moment Bitcoin's development infrastructure collapsed, the money that rebuilt it, quickly, strategically, through the most prestigious academic institution available, came partly from Jeffrey Epstein, through a director who knew the source and concealed it, during a period when that director was in regular communication with Epstein about the initiative. The code is open. Yes, anyone can audit it. But the people who write the code, review the code, and decide which proposals get merged into the code, those people needed to be employed by someone. And at Bitcoin's most vulnerable moment, that someone was, in part, a convicted sex offender operating through the halls of MIT. That doesn't mean Bitcoin is broken. It means the story of how it survived is a lot darker than the mythology suggests. And if this were the only connection, maybe you could call it a coincidence. An unfortunate footnote. But it's not the only connection, not even close. In the next video, we're going to look at Blockstream, the company that was building Bitcoin's most critical infrastructure at the exact same time. Sidechains, Lightning Network, the tools that were supposed to make Bitcoin scale. And we're going to look at the emails showing Blockstream's founders in direct communication with Epstein, planning meetings, discussing investments, and coordinating a trip to his island in the US Virgin Islands. You know, the island. That's video 2. I'll see you there.